Dear viewers, I welcome you with a heart full of gratitude and warmth. May your life be filled with endless joy, love, and blessings. May you always find strength in your struggles, hope in your darkest moments, and victory after every hardship. Today, I bring you a story that will shake your heart, bring tears to your eyes, and remind you of the true power of love and perseverance. 10 years of heartbreak. A miracle no one saw coming. A society that never stopped judging, and a love that conquered it all. Join me on this emotional roller coaster as we dive into the journey of Liam and Evelyn, a couple who endured years of pain, yet never let go of hope. When fate finally blessed them with a child, the world had something to say. But what happened next will leave you speechless. Stay tuned, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more heart-touching, thrilling, and lesson-filled stories. Put on your hand-free and immerse yourself in this unforgettable journey. The world knew Liam Carter as a man of unshakable power, a billionaire CEO, a leader in the corporate world, a man who could turn dust into gold with just his words. He built his empire from the ground up, defied the odds, and became the name that everyone respected and feared. But beneath the sharp suits, the confident smirk, and the steely determination, Liam was just a man who, despite his success, carried a silent ache in his heart. That ache was Evelyn Carter, the love of his life, his wife of 10 years, the woman who completed him in ways no wealth or power ever could. Liam still remembered the first time he saw her. She was different from anyone he had ever met. Kind, compassionate, and breathtakingly beautiful. She had the kind of smile that could melt the coldest hearts, the kind of warmth that could make even the most broken souls believe in love. She didn't care about his wealth, his name, or his status. She cared about him. They had built a life together, one filled with love, laughter, and dreams. And the biggest dream of all was to have a child. A dream that year after year seemed more impossible to reach. In the first year of their marriage, hope filled their hearts. Every month, Evelyn would smile excitedly, her hands trembling as she took yet another pregnancy test, believing that this time, it would be different. And every month, the same cruel reality shattered her hopes. "Negative," she whispered, forcing a smile, but Liam could see the way her fingers clenched the test, how her breath hitched as she turned away, how her shoulders slumped in silent defeat. At first, they told themselves it was just bad timing, maybe stress, maybe they weren't trying at the right time. They laughed it off, convincing each other that next time would be different. But then a year turned into two turned into five into 10, and hope, once bright and unbreakable, slowly started to fade. Society was ruthless. The whispers started as quiet murmurs at dinner parties, stolen glances at social events. "Still no baby?" they would ask with pity-laced voices, their eyes flickering toward Evelyn as if she were incomplete, as if she were failing. Then the questions became sharper. "Have you tried IVF? Maybe adoption is your only choice. Aren't you worried Liam will want an heir?" The media was even crueler. Headlines in tabloids speculated about their childless marriage. "Is the Carter empire in danger? CEO still without an heir?" Some suggested that Liam would leave her for a younger woman, one who could give him the legacy his name demanded. Liam wanted to protect Evelyn from every cruel word, every pitiful glance. But how do you shield someone from the weight of the world? Evelyn was strong, stronger than anyone Liam had ever known. She endured the whispers, the endless questions, the invasive advice from people who had no idea what she was going through. But even the strongest hearts have limits. Liam noticed the changes in her. She started avoiding family gatherings, tired of hearing distant relatives ask, "When are you going to give us good news?" She stopped attending social events, too exhausted to pretend she didn't hear the whispers behind her back. She even stopped looking at baby aisles in stores, as if the sight of tiny clothes and stuffed animals would break her. And Liam, who had spent his entire life solving problems, making things happen, felt utterly powerless. Late at night, when the city was asleep, Liam would find Evelyn sitting by the bedroom window, staring at the moon. He knew what she was thinking. She never said it out loud, but he could see it in the way she hugged her knees, in the way she blinked rapidly to fight back tears. One night, she finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "Maybe we should stop trying." Liam's chest tightened. "Maybe?" "It's time to accept reality," she continued, her fingers gripping the fabric of her nightgown. "Maybe this isn't meant for us." Liam reached for her hand, lacing his fingers with hers. "Evelyn, look at me," he said softly, waiting until her tear-filled eyes met his. "You are my reality. You are my world. With or without a child, you are enough for me." A single tear slipped down her cheek, and he wiped it away gently, pressing his forehead against hers. "I just wanted to give you this, Liam," she choked out. "I wanted to give you a family." "We already are a family," he whispered. "You and me. That's all I need." But deep down, as he held her close, he wished, God, he wished, that he could give her the miracle she so desperately longed for. Liam Carter had fought against business rivals, stock market crashes, and billion-dollar deals. He had faced scandals, betrayals, and power struggles. But this, watching the love of his life suffer, watching her slowly lose hope, was the hardest battle he had ever faced. And he swore to himself, no matter what it took, no matter how long it took, he would stand by her. Through every tear, through every heartbreak, through every disappointment, because their love, tested by time, by fate, by a world that refused to understand, was stronger than any storm. And even if they never had a child, Liam Carter knew one thing with absolute certainty. He would love Evelyn until his last breath. Evelyn Carter had always been a woman of grace and resilience. She carried herself with a quiet strength, the kind that made people admire her without ever truly understanding the weight she bore. For years, she had stood beside Liam, smiling at gala events, laughing at social gatherings, playing the role of the perfect CEO's wife. But behind that flawless facade, she was breaking. She had smiled through the countless doctor's appointments, the endless fertility treatments, and the quiet disappointment that followed every negative test. She had smiled when relatives told her to just relax, as if her pain was something she could simply will away. She had smiled when friends announced their pregnancies, swallowing the lump in her throat as they placed her hand on their growing bellies and said, "You'll be next." But she wasn't next. Year after year passed, and each one stole another piece of her hope. So Evelyn did the only thing she could do. She stopped trying to convince the world she was okay. It started with small things. She stopped attending baby showers. She made excuses when friends invited her over to see their newborns. She even began to avoid family gatherings, where the questions were sharper than knives. "Still no baby. Have you considered adoption?" "Maybe it's just not meant to be." That last one, those words cut the deepest. Not meant to be. As if her dream of being a mother was a foolish fantasy. As if she wasn't meant to love a child of her own. Even in public, there was no escape. She once overheard two women whispering at a charity event. Poor thing. A decade of marriage and still no child? Imagine being a billionaire's wife and still failing at the one thing that actually matters. The words crashed into her like a tidal wave, but she didn't let them see her break. Instead, she excused herself, went to the nearest bathroom stall, and cried silently, gripping the edge of the sink to keep herself standing. She never told Liam. She couldn't. He had already given her so much, his love, his patience, his unwavering support. She didn't want to be the reason he carried more weight on his shoulders, So she did what she had become so good at doing. She smiled, she painted on happiness like a mask and convinced the world she was fine. But Liam knew better. Liam Carter was a man who could read numbers, contracts, and people like an open book. He knew when a business deal was about to go south before the other party even realized it themselves. He knew when a competitor was bluffing, when an employee was lying, when the stock market was about to take a turn. And he knew when his wife was in pain. He saw the way she forced laughter in public, how her once bright eyes now carried an emptiness that hadn't been there before. He noticed how she no longer reached for the baby name book that used to sit by their bed, how she stopped stopping in front of toy stores, how she avoided looking at children altogether. But the worst part, she never talked about it. She never let him see her break. At work, Liam was a powerful, fearless businessman. He had conquered industries, crushed competition, and built an empire from nothing. But at home, he was a helpless husband, watching the love of his life slip into a quiet despair he didn't know how to pull her out of. One night, long past midnight, Liam woke up to find Evelyn missing from their bed. His heart clenched with worry. He searched the house, moving silently through the dimly lit hallways until he found her in the nursery. A nursery that had never been used. The room was perfect. White furniture, soft pastel colors, tiny stuffed animals lined neatly on the shelves. Everything was ready, had been for years, but there was no baby to fill it. Evelyn sat on the floor, knees drawn to her chest, holding something close to her heart, a tiny, pale blue baby blanket. Liam's breath hitched. He remembered that blanket. She had bought it nearly 8 years ago when they first started trying, back when hope was still alive in her eyes. She hadn't cried in front of him for months, but now she was breaking, silent sobs racking her fragile frame. Liam knelt beside her, his heart shattering into a million pieces. "Evelyn!" She didn't look at him. I can't keep doing this, Liam," she whispered. Her voice was so soft, so broken, that it nearly undid him. "I don't know how to keep hoping for something that might never happen." Liam clenched his jaw, trying to keep himself together, but it was impossible. "Maybe we should stop trying," she said, her fingers tightening around the blanket. "Maybe it's time to accept reality." Liam felt something inside him crack. This was his worst fear, not that they would never have a child, but that Evelyn would lose herself in the pain. That the woman who had once been full of dreams and laughter would slowly fade into someone who had given up. He couldn't let that happen. Without a word, Liam reached out and took her in his arms. She didn't resist. She let herself sink into his warmth, burying her face in his chest as he held her like she was the most precious thing in the world. "Evelyn," he murmured, his voice raw with emotion, "no matter what happens, you are enough for me, always." She shook her head against him, her tears soaking into his shirt. "But I wanted to give you this. I wanted to give you a family." Liam pulled back just enough to cup her face, forcing her to meet his gaze. "We already are a family," he said firmly. "You and me. That's all I need." For a long moment she just looked at him, as if searching for any trace of a lie, but she found none, because Liam meant every word. He would love her, child or no child. He would stand by her through every storm, every heartbreak, every moment of doubt. And deep down, though he would never say it out loud, he still held on to hope. Because miracles had a way of finding those who needed them most. And if anyone in this world deserved a miracle, it was Evelyn. The sky outside their penthouse was painted with streaks of silver lightning, each flash illuminating the cityscape for a mere second before plunging everything back into darkness. Thunder roared in the distance, a deep, rolling sound that seemed to shake the very foundation of the earth. Rain lashed against the floor-to-ceiling windows of their home, a relentless downpour that matched the storm raging inside Liam Carter's heart. It had been a long day. Liam had come home late, as he often did, exhausted from endless meetings, from dealing with investors who only saw numbers, from carrying the weight of an empire on his shoulders. But none of it compared to the weight in his heart. He stepped into the kitchen, expecting to find Evelyn waiting for him as she always did, with a tired but loving smile. Instead, he found her on the floor. For a second, just one agonizing second, Liam couldn't move. His wife, his Evelyn, the love of his life, was crumpled on the cold marble floor, her body limp, her breath shallow. A glass lay shattered beside her, shards glistening under the harsh kitchen lights. The sound of the storm outside was deafening, but inside Liam's mind, there was only silence. Then, as if something inside him snapped, he moved. "Evelyn!" He was on his knees in an instant, gathering her fragile form in his arms. Her skin was cold, her lips slightly parted as if she had tried to call for him before she fell. "Stay with me, baby," Liam begged, his voice trembling. He pressed his hand against her cheek, feeling for warmth, for life, for anything. "Open your eyes, please." But she didn't respond. His heart pounded wildly, fear clawing at his throat as he scooped her up and carried her through the storm, barely noticing the rain soaking through his clothes. He had faced ruthless businessmen, stood against enemies who wanted to see him fall, survived in a world that devoured the weak, but nothing had ever terrified him like this. The hospital was a blur. Nurses rushed forward, doctors barked orders, machines beeped, and yet Liam could hear nothing except the ragged sound of his own breathing. They took her from his arms, disappearing behind cold steel doors, leaving him alone in the sterile, white hallway. His fingers curled into fists, his body shaking. He had never felt this powerless, not even in the worst moments of his life. He had built an empire, had conquered the world, but none of it mattered if he lost her. Minutes stretched into eternity. Liam paced the floor, running his hands through his hair, his mind racing with worst-case scenarios. Was she sick? Had the years of stress and heartbreak taken a toll on her body? Had he pushed her too hard by holding on to hope? And then, just when he thought he might lose his mind, the doors opened, the doctor stepped out, his expression unreadable. Liam braced himself for the worst. "Mr. Carter," the doctor began, glancing at the chart in his hands. His tone was calm, but there was something else there, something Liam couldn't quite decipher. "Just tell me," Liam cut in, his voice hoarse. "Is she okay?" The doctor hesitated for only a second, then slowly a smile spread across his face. "Mr. Carter, your wife is pregnant." Liam froze. The words didn't make sense. Pregnant. Number that wasn't possible. They had tried for 10 years. They had been told it would never happen. They had exhausted every treatment, every possibility. For a moment, he truly believed he had misheard. "What?" His voice came out barely above a whisper. The doctor's smile grew wider. "She's pregnant, Mr. Carter. Around 6 weeks along. And so far everything looks good." Liam felt the air leave his lungs. The room swayed, the edges of his vision blurred. Pregnant, pregnant, pregnant. It was real. The thing they had prayed for, cried for, begged for, after a decade of heartbreak and disappointment, it had finally happened. His knees gave out. The ruthless, untouchable CEO of Carter Enterprises, the man feared in boardrooms and admired in the business world, dropped to his knees in the middle of a hospital hallway. His entire body shook as he buried his face in his hands. And then he wept. Not just a few tears, not just quiet sobs. These were uncontrollable, raw, soul-deep sobs, the kind that came from years of silent suffering, from a pain so deeply rooted that he had nearly accepted it as permanent. His shoulders trembled, his breath came in gasps, his heart pounded so hard it felt like it might shatter. A gentle hand touched his shoulder. He looked up, and there she was, Evelyn. Tears streamed down her face, her lips trembling, her entire body still weak from the collapse. But she was awake. She was looking at him. "Liam." Her voice cracked, barely able to get the words out. He stood up so fast he nearly stumbled, reaching for her, cupping her face in his shaking hands. "Is it real?" she whispered. Liam let out a shaky laugh, one that sounded more like a sob. He nodded, pressing his forehead to hers. "It's real," he choked out. "We're going to have a baby." Evelyn covered her mouth, her entire body trembling. Tears spilled freely, and she let out a broken, joyous laugh, one filled with disbelief, with relief, with a love so powerful it could move mountains. Liam pressed soft, desperate kisses to her forehead, her cheeks, her hands. "I told you," he whispered against her skin. "I told you miracles exist." And for the first time in 10 years, Evelyn believed him. It didn't take long. The moment Evelyn's pregnancy became public, the world erupted. Headlines blared the news across every major platform. Social media flooded with posts, discussions, and speculation. Paparazzi stationed themselves outside the Carter mansion, desperate for a glimpse of the couple who had defied the odds. Billionaire CEO Liam Carter and wife expecting first child after a decade. A miracle or science, the truth behind Evelyn Carter's pregnancy. Finally, the Carter heir is on the way. Some messages were kind. Strangers from all over the world sent blessings, sharing their own struggles with infertility, thanking Evelyn for giving them hope. Women who had walked the same painful path wrote letters, pouring their hearts out, telling her she wasn't alone. But with kindness also came cruelty. The whispers started small, harmless at first. "Oh, what a blessing, but I wonder, how did it happen after 10 years? Then they grew sharper. They must have used a surrogate. There's no way she got pregnant naturally. Or maybe they finally went for IVF and just didn't want to admit it. What if something's wrong with the baby? After 10 years, complications are bound to happen." Evelyn tried to ignore it. She told herself they didn't matter, that the only thing that mattered was the tiny life growing inside her. But then, the worst whispers came. What if the baby isn't Liam's? The words struck like a dagger. Evelyn had suffered in silence for years, enduring the judgment of those who believed a woman's worth was tied to her ability to bear children. And now that she finally carried the miracle she had prayed for, they still found a way to tear her down. Hormones surged through her body, amplifying every emotion. She wanted to be strong, to let their words roll off her back. But some nights, as she lay in bed with Liam sleeping beside her, she found herself staring at the ceiling, blinking back tears. Would the world ever let her be happy? Liam saw the change in her. She laughed a little less, smiled a little less. The glow that pregnancy was supposed to bring was dimmed by the weight of public scrutiny. And then one night, she broke. They had been watching the news when a panel of commentators dissected their pregnancy like it was a business deal. After 10 years, this pregnancy raises questions. Could it be IVF, surrogacy, or something else? Some sources claim Liam Carter has been spotted at fertility clinics in the past. Was this a secret struggle? Let's not forget the elephant in the room. A woman suddenly pregnant after a decade. There's always the chance this child isn't even his. Evelyn shot up from the couch and stormed out of the room. Liam followed immediately, finding her in their bedroom, her hands clenched into fists. Her shoulders shook, but she refused to turn around. "Evelyn." His voice was gentle, but she shook her head. "Why?" Her voice cracked. "Why do they always have to say something? First I was an unworthy wife because I couldn't have children, and now that I'm pregnant I'm... What? A liar? A cheater?" She let out a bitter laugh. "Will I ever be enough?" Liam crossed the room in 3 strides, spinning her around to face him. "You have always been enough. he said fiercely, "and you always will be." Her lips trembled. "But they don't matter." His hands framed her face, his thumbs brushing away the tears spilling down her cheeks. "You, me, and this baby. That's all that matters. Let them talk, let them whisper, let them doubt." His voice softened, but there was steel beneath it. "I promise you, love, I won't let them hurt you anymore." Liam Carter was a man of action. He had spent years building his empire, his reputation, his legacy. He had stood before ruthless businessmen, in front of flashing cameras, under the scrutiny of millions. But nothing had ever mattered as much as this. When he and Evelyn arrived at the Carter Foundation's annual charity gala, they both knew what was coming. The room was filled with New York's elite, billionaires, celebrities, reporters, and cameras flashing endlessly. And amid the dazzling dresses and expensive suits, the whispers were louder than ever. "Look at them, putting on a united front. Do you think she'll ever admit the truth? Poor Liam. He probably knows, but he's too proud to say anything." Then Liam stepped onto the stage. The room fell silent. With Evelyn watching from the sidelines, her hands pressed protectively over her growing belly, he took a deep breath. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his voice even but filled with authority. "I've stood on many stages before, in front of thousands, in boardrooms, in front of investors, even before the world's greatest minds." His gaze swept across the room, sharp and unwavering. "But tonight, I stand here as a husband, as a father." A murmur ran through the crowd, but Liam wasn't finished. "For 10 years, my wife and I endured a journey no one can truly understand unless they've walked it themselves. We faced heartbreak, loss, and the weight of society's expectations." His jaw tightened. "And now that we have finally been blessed with a miracle, the same people who once pitied us have found new ways to hurt us." His voice grew firmer. "To those who doubted my wife, who questioned our love, who whispered cruel things about our child, let me make something clear." His eyes glistened with unshed tears, but his voice did not waver. "This child is ours, a miracle, a gift, and we don't owe anyone an explanation." The room was silent. A single clap echoed, then another and another. Within seconds, the entire ballroom erupted in applause. Evelyn covered her mouth, tears streaming down her face. She had never loved Liam more than she did in that moment. As he stepped down from the stage, he walked straight to her. Ignoring the cameras, the people, the flashing lights, he cupped her face and whispered, "I love you." And for the first time in a long time, Evelyn let go of the fear, the doubt, the pain. Because no matter what the world said, she had everything she had ever needed. Liam, their child, and a love that no amount of judgment could ever break. For months, life had been a dream. Evelyn's belly grew rounder, and with it, Liam's excitement grew tenfold. Every ultrasound was a sacred moment. Watching their baby's tiny heartbeat on the screen, hearing the rapid thumps that sounded like the sweetest melody. At night, Liam would lie beside Evelyn, his hand resting on her stomach, whispering to their unborn child, "You are so loved. We waited so long for you, little one. You have no idea how much your mother and I already adore you." Evelyn would laugh softly, running her fingers through Liam's hair. "I think the baby likes your voice," she teased. And in those moments, Liam felt invincible. Nothing could go wrong, until it did. It happened on a quiet evening. The nursery was almost finished, painted in soft hues, filled with plush toys, a crib carved with care. Liam had just returned from work, expecting to have dinner with Evelyn. Instead, he found her curled up on the living room floor, gasping in pain. "Evelyn!" He rushed to her side, his heart slamming against his ribs. Her face was pale, her lips trembling. "Liam, something's wrong." Terror gripped him. He scooped her into his arms, his mind racing. He didn't care about the reporters who were always stationed outside their home. He didn't care about the flashing cameras as he carried her to the car, barking orders to his driver. "Drive! Now!" Evelyn whimpered in pain, clutching her stomach. Liam held her hand, his grip firm, his voice shaking. "I've got you, sweetheart, just hold on." But the fear in her eyes made his blood run cold. At the hospital, chaos erupted. Doctors and nurses rushed Evelyn away, calling for emergency tests. Liam followed, demanding answers, but he was forced to wait outside the operating room. Minutes felt like hours. Then a doctor walked up to him, his face grim. "Mr. Carter, it's serious. Your wife is experiencing severe internal bleeding. We need to act fast." Liam's throat went dry. "Then act! Save her." The doctor hesitated. "There's something else." He exhaled, his voice heavy. "If the bleeding worsens, we might have to make a choice, your wife or the baby." The world tilted. "No." Liam's voice was barely a whisper. "I know this is devastating, but if it comes to that, we need your decision. Who do we save?" Liam felt like he was drowning. How could they ask him to choose? His Evelyn, the love of his life, the woman who had stood by him, who had endured years of heartbreak, who had suffered so much for this baby. Or their child, the miracle they had prayed for, the tiny life they had longed to hold in their arms. It was an impossible choice. He sank onto the chair, his head in his hands. "Please, save them both." His voice was hoarse, desperate. "I can't lose her. I can't lose either of them." The doctor placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll do everything we can." And then Liam was alone. Liam Carter, a man who had stood undefeated in boardrooms, a man who had built an empire with sheer determination, had never felt so powerless. He paced the waiting room, his hands clenched into fists. His mind was a battlefield. Memories of Evelyn's laughter, of their dreams, of the baby they had wanted for so long. What if he lost them both? What if this miracle was taken away just as cruelly as it had arrived? God! His voice broke as he whispered, "I've never asked for anything, but I'm begging you now. Don't take them away from me. Please." Minutes turned into hours. Every time the doors swung open, his heart stopped, only to sink again when it wasn't the doctor. Then finally, after what felt like an eternity, the doors opened and the surgeon walked out. Liam's legs nearly gave out. "Mr. Carter." The doctor's face was unreadable. Liam gripped his arms. "Tell me." A slow smile spread across the doctor's face. "Both mother and baby are safe." The world blurred. Liam exhaled shakily, his entire body trembling. Safe. They were safe. His legs gave out, and he collapsed into the nearest chair, burying his face in his hands as sobs racked his body. The fear, the agony, the helplessness, it all came crashing down. But they were alive. Evelyn, their child, his world. Moments later, a nurse led him into the room. Evelyn lay on the hospital bed, pale but alive. A soft glow surrounded her as she held a tiny swaddled bundle in her arms. Liam's breath caught in his throat. She looked up at him, exhausted but smiling. "We did it, Liam." His feet moved on their own. He knelt beside her, his hands shaking as he reached for the baby. Tiny fingers peeked from the blanket. A small, perfect face. A heartbeat he had once only heard was now a warm, breathing reality in his arms. Liam let out a choked sob. "Our baby." His voice broke. "Our miracle." Evelyn smiled weakly, reaching out to cup his cheek. "We're a family now." He leaned down, pressing a soft kiss to her forehead. His tears soaked her skin, but he didn't care. He looked at his child, their child, and whispered, "I will love you forever." And at that moment, Liam Carter, the powerful CEO, wasn't thinking about wealth, empires, or the opinions of the world. He was simply a husband, a father, a man who had been given the greatest gift of all. The delivery room had been a battlefield, but now it was filled with the softest, most beautiful sound in the world, the cries of their newborn daughter. Liam stood frozen, staring at the tiny miracle in the nurse's hands. His heart pounded wildly, his breath uneven. "Mr. Carter," the nurse smiled warmly, "would you like to hold your daughter?" His daughter. Liam swallowed hard, his hands shaking as he reached forward. The moment his fingers brushed against her soft, delicate skin, a choked sob escaped his throat. She was so small, so perfect. As he cradled her in his arms, her wails quieted. A pair of bright, curious eyes peeked up at him, and in that instant, something inside Liam shattered. A dam broke. Years of frustration, helplessness, longing. Tears streamed down his face as he held her close, his voice thick with emotion. "Lily," he whispered, pressing a gentle kiss to her tiny forehead. "My Lily." It was more than just a name. It was a promise of love, a promise of protection, a promise that no matter what the world said, no matter what trials awaited them, she would always be safe in his arms. Liam Carter, the ruthless billionaire, the man who had never let emotions weaken him in a boardroom, was sobbing uncontrollably. Not just for Lily, not just for Evelyn, but for the years of pain. For every time he had watched Evelyn cry behind closed doors, her body shaking with silent grief. For every time she had held a negative pregnancy test in trembling hands. For every prayer they had whispered into the cold, unresponsive night. Evelyn, resting weakly on the hospital bed, watched him with tears glistening in her own eyes. She had seen Liam cry before, but never like this. Never with such raw, unfiltered emotion. He was crying for all the times he had put on a brave face for her. For all the nights he had held her and whispered, "It's okay, love, we're okay," even when his own heart was breaking. For every time he had felt powerless, watching the love of his life suffer, knowing there was nothing he could do. And now, after 10 long years, those tears were finally falling. But they weren't just tears of grief. They were tears of healing, tears of overwhelming, breathtaking joy. As Liam stood there, holding Lily as if she were the most fragile, precious thing in the universe, Evelyn saw something shift in him. Liam had always been a protector, a provider. But now he was something more. A father. A man who had spent his entire life building an empire, only to realize that the greatest kingdom he would ever rule was right here, in his arms. "She's ours," Evelyn whispered, her voice hoarse with exhaustion but filled with warmth. Liam turned to her, his face still streaked with tears. "Ours," he echoed, his voice cracking. He sat beside her on the hospital bed, placing Lily carefully in her mother's arms. Evelyn cradled their daughter close, pressing a soft kiss to her tiny head. Liam wrapped an arm around them both, his heart overflowing. "I love you," he murmured, his lips against Evelyn's temple. "Both of you, more than anything in this world." Evelyn leaned into him, closing her eyes. "We did it, Liam." And as Lily let out a tiny yawn, curling her tiny fingers around her father's thumb, Liam knew this was everything he had ever wanted, everything he would ever need, and he would spend the rest of his life proving it. The news of Lily Carter's birth spread like wildfire. The headlines exploded across media outlets, social networks, and every corner of the internet. After 10 years of struggles, CEO Liam Carter and his wife welcomed their miracle baby. Powerful billionaire seen weeping for his newborn daughter, a rare sight of pure love. Evelyn Carter, once judged for infertility, emerges as the strongest woman in the room. What was once whispered about in corners was now discussed openly. For a decade, society had pitied Evelyn, mocked her behind closed doors, and questioned her worth. But now the same world that had doubted her was in awe, because she had survived, because she had won. But even in the glow of their happiness, there were still those who clung to cruelty. So what if she had a baby? She still took too long. They probably used money to make this happen. IVF, surrogacy, who knows? A child after 10 years? I wonder if it's really his. Even as a father, even as a man who had just experienced the most profound joy of his life, Liam Carter saw how harsh the world could be. He had spent years ignoring the judgment, shielding Evelyn from the ugliness. But today, he wasn't going to ignore it. Today, he was going to speak. A week after Lily's birth, Liam Carter stood before a sea of flashing cameras. Evelyn sat beside him, looking radiant despite her exhaustion. Lily was nestled in her arms, wrapped in a soft white blanket, blissfully unaware of the world watching her. Liam adjusted the microphone. His hands were steady, but his heart pounded with the weight of what he was about to say. The room fell silent. He exhaled slowly, then spoke. For 10 years, my wife and I faced heartbreak, judgment, and whispers behind our backs. His deep voice was unwavering, but his eyes shone with emotion. We were told we were incomplete, that we weren't a real family because we had no children, that my wife was less of a woman because she couldn't conceive. Evelyn bowed her head slightly, pain flickering in her eyes. Liam squeezed her hand under the table. And now, after 10 years of waiting, of hoping, of breaking and rebuilding ourselves, we finally have our daughter. But instead of celebrating, some still choose to judge. He glanced around the room, letting the weight of his words settle. I have something to say to those people. Silence stretched. The world held its breath. Your worth is not defined by what society expects of you. A single sentence, simple, yet more powerful than anything he had ever said in a boardroom. Liam looked straight into the cameras, as if speaking to every man, every woman who had ever been told they weren't enough. Women are not defined by their ability to have children. Men are not defined by their ability to provide. Love is not measured by success, wealth, or family expectations. Love is measured by standing by each other, even in the darkest of times. Evelyn squeezed his hand, her eyes brimming with tears. My wife is the strongest woman I know. His voice cracked slightly, but he didn't stop. She endured pain that most people will never understand, and yet through it all, she never stopped loving, never stopped believing. That is what makes her incredible. Not the fact that she gave birth, but the fact that she never let this world break her. A deep hush fell over the room. Some reporters had stopped taking notes. Some had even lowered their cameras, and for the first time in a long time, Liam saw something in their eyes that wasn't gossip or judgment. It was respect. Liam's words went viral. Millions watched the clip, feeling something stir in their hearts. Women who had struggled with infertility wept as they listened. Men who had been taught to hide their emotions felt something shift within them. And in a world where judgment ran rampant, where people were torn apart by race, gender, and unrealistic expectations, Liam's words became more than just a statement. They became a movement. Messages flooded their inboxes. Thank you for saying what so many of us needed to hear. I haven't been able to have children, and for years I felt like a failure. But today, I feel seen. I used to think a man crying was a sign of weakness, but seeing you cry for your daughter, that's the strongest thing I've ever seen. People who once mocked Evelyn now admired her. People who once saw Liam as just another cold businessman now saw the depth of his heart. And slowly, something remarkable happened. The voices of judgment grew quieter, because love, true, unwavering love, was louder. One evening, as the sun set behind the Carter estate, Liam stood by the nursery window, watching Lily sleep. Evelyn walked in quietly, wrapping her arms around his waist. She's perfect, Liam murmured, his eyes soft. Evelyn smiled. She is. They stood there, simply watching their daughter breathe. Do you think the world will change? Evelyn asked softly. Liam turned to her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. Maybe not overnight, he admitted. But we started something. And sometimes all it takes is one voice to make a difference. Evelyn looked up at him, love shining in her eyes. I'm proud of you. I'm proud of us, he corrected, pulling her closer. As he pressed a tender kiss to her forehead, Lily stirred in her crib, letting out a tiny sigh. Liam smiled. This was what true success looked like. Not the billions in his bank account, not the skyscrapers with his name on them. But this, a wife who had taught him the meaning of strength, a daughter who had shown him the depths of love, a family that had survived despite everything, and as he held Evelyn close, he knew they had won, not against infertility, not against society, but against the idea that love should ever be measured by anything other than the hearts that hold it. And that, more than anything, was a victory worth celebrating.